Hi everyone, and thanks for being me for my live feed. Now, as I've said many times before, this is an experiment. So who knows how it turns out. Last time I stuffed it up, I unplugged something and it kind of stuffed up my system. That won't be happening today, I don't think. I hope that you can all hear me and that you're all well. And I want to invite as many of you as I can to have a discussion with me about, and I've only got one particular subject that I want to talk about on this occasion. But there might be other things that those of you that do join want to talk about as well. Please let me know what conversations you would like to have, and we could have such conversations. And I'd just like to say at the outset, please subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further notifications. Let me know what you think about the subjects that we talk about. Now, I'm doing a live feed on a Tuesday and a Thursday from now on, and so if you don't catch up with this one, you could probably catch up with the one on Thursday. In the meantime, subscribe, ring the bell for further notifications, let me know what it is that you think. And also, I do need to say that I would like to, Sean, thanks. Sean says, Sky's spin today has been phenomenal. Thanks. I do notice that, Sean, I'll speak directly to you, but I do notice that there's a community that has developed, I should say, around my critique of Sky News. And I'm going to offer some more critique of them as we go through this this segment today, which is focused on Gaza in particular. And so there's a couple of things I want to focus on. Not only the catastrophe that is Gaza and how the rest of the world is responding to that, but also how Albanese has chosen to recognise Palestine. Now, I see this personally as an important move and is something that we all should be extremely mindful of, because it is about acknowledging, I think, that what's been happening in Gaza has been a catastrophe. Now, I've noticed that in Sky News, and those of you that don't know, I'm kind of see myself as a wee bit of an expert in Sky News. I watch a lot of their videos. I do have access to them live, but the stuff that I record and show you is usually a YouTube clip. But it is interesting to me how they will often raise issues around how Hamas have done some cruel acts, which they have, and no one's denying any of that. And they continually talk about the 1,200, 1,300 people, whatever it was, that were massacred on October the 7th, 2023. And we all acknowledge that as well. What they never talk about, and I say this with absolute sense of integrity, the thing that they do not talk about are the potentially hundreds of thousands of innocent people that have been killed since. And the other focus of theirs is that that Hamas have refused to negotiate some of the agreements put forward by Israel. And I don't believe that is just because the agreements, that they just disagree with whatever Israel say and do. I think that the problem here is that Hamas, as terrible an organisation as they are, and we've got to accept that they are, I don't know if IDF is all that much better. In fact, I'm now starting to think that, maybe we should start thinking about the IDF as being a terrorist organisation as well, because they do tend to terrorise anybody in the Middle East, you've got to admit. The thing about how Israel wants America to occupy Gaza in the... Hi, Tony. Do you know anything about how Israel wants America to occupy Gaza on their behalf? Actually, that's an interesting topic. So thanks, Damon. I appreciate that. So really what the question here is, do you know anything about how Israel wants America to occupy Gaza on their behalf? I think this raises a really interesting question, because one of the things that we need to focus on is what happens to Gaza firstly, let's acknowledge that there's not going to be much left of Gaza, not much left at all. And I had this article here from The Guardian that I'll bring up, which one am I going to? This one, which actually focused on only. So Gaza used to produce a lot of their own food for their own consumption, obviously, but there's this article which says now they only produce 1.5% of Gaza cropland left for starving Palestinians due to Israel's war. So the UN says Israel's destruction of Gaza has left starving Palestinians with access to only 1.5% of cropland. So the interesting point for me here is that not only have the IDF destroyed the places in which people could live, their buildings, their housing, their whatever. Not only have they destroyed that, they've destroyed the land from which they could grow food. Now, I don't know if all that many people are aware of that very fact, but it's an important fact to be cognitive of. This is down from 4% in April, according to the Food and Agricultural Organisation, suggesting Israel has continued to target Palestinian farmlands since initiating a complete blockade in early March, since restricting aid from entering the Gaza Strip, where 2 million starved people are trapped. Before the conflict, Gaza was a thriving agricultural hub where farmers and ordinary Palestinians cultivated a wide variety of fruits, vegetables, nuts and grains for local consumption. So according to the FAO, agriculture accounted for around 10% of Gaza Strip's economy and more than 560,000 people in a quarter of the population were at least partially supported by agriculture and fishing. Now, I don't know what Israel's done in terms of the fishing, except they probably put a whole lot of mines off the coast of Gaza. So that's probably ruled out as well as destroying the land from which. So what does it say about the IDF that they've actually chosen to, in terms of this notion around starvation? So if you're going to starve a group of people, then you prevent them from getting food. Clearly the IDF have done that. They've denied it, but they have. And at the moment, they're not even sending enough food into Gaza to cater for the population that exists there at the moment. So they're not able to feed the population that is there, according to the United Nations. And these are organisations set up by Israel. So not only are they doing that, they've also destroyed the land from which they could toil and produce food for their own people. It is a disgrace. So in relation to Damon's question too, who's going to occupy Gaza? I think this is an interesting question. I'd really like to know what any of you think about this, because at the end of the day, firstly, how do you rebuild a country that is decimated in the way that Gaza is, where all the buildings have been destroyed, or at least 80% of them have, apparently. And so as a result of that, people are homeless. There's no place that they can live. They live in tents, they live in rubble, whatever. So how do you rebuild the country given there's so much destruction? How do you rebuild a country where there's so much destruction on the land from which they will grow food to sustain themselves? I don't know the answers to any of that, but I can tell you now that there needs to be, as there was in Germany after the war, America, to their credit, stepped in and funded the rebuilding of Germany, as they did in Japan. Now, they at least had a sense of moral integrity, I guess, back then, because they realised they had done the destruction. I doubt whether Israel necessarily on its own wants to rebuild Gaza. I think that they will look for help from other countries in order to do so. But before all of that happens, Gaza has to become some sort of a country with its own sense of self-government. And how that gets realised is actually the debating point right at this particular point in time, because there are so many so many different nuances, I guess, to this problem. So, who runs? Do the PLO run it? Do Hamas or a version of Hamas run Gaza? Who oversees whatever government chooses to take shape? Who oversees the governance around all of that? So who implements that? And I've often wondered why we haven't heard more from the United Nations on proposals they could put forward in terms of actually going into Gaza, setting up a preliminary government of some description, reorganising the infrastructure, organising that there be some sort of contractors that are allowed back into Gaza to mow down the houses that are the places that the apartments and whatever that have been destroyed, to mow them down and to start rebuilding. And my fear is that someone like Trump will say, well, okay, this is the chance for Gaza to become the Riviera of the Middle East. And he will see, this is such an evil little shit that he will see this as an opportunity. Trump will see this as an opportunity to invest in the area at rock bottom prices, probably no cost whatsoever to him, to go and acquire land and to put up places that are extravagant, encouraging. Look, apparently the coastline is quite beautiful. The sand is clean. It is a lovely place to be. And a lot of people in Israel would also like to live there because it's obviously along the coast and so on, and because the land would be land would be relatively cheap. So that's the other question: who sells the land to whom? Who runs and controls all of that? And what's that all about? But I can assure you that Donald Trump will want a piece of that pie because that's the sort of character he is. And but I think, importantly, someone else needs to step in prior to all of that, like the United Nations, like NATO, like at least not NATO, but the European Union, perhaps, and the UK and Canada and so on, could step in, and they are the ones that could fund that. The question really remains, how much would Israel like to still control whatever happens in Gaza? Would Israel be okay with some other organisation, some independent organisation, not necessarily Palestinian, but some independent organisation taking over control of Gaza? What are the probabilities there? What is the likelihood of that actually happening? Who knows? Give me some thoughts. What are your thoughts around all of this? What do you think should actually happen there? And so there's this other article I also pulled up from the Times. And that was about to recognise. So this is also about recognising Palestinian statehood. And so amid mounting international pressure on Israel to end its war in Gaza, there is growing diplomatic momentum in the West to recognise Palestinian statehood, with Australia becoming the latest to announce plans to do so. Interestingly enough, I don't know about you, but I get so excited when people notice that we exist here in Australia. That somehow, whenever you see Australia brought up, you think, oh my God, aren't we suddenly important? This is an amazing moment. I suddenly feel that, the rest of the world understands that we do exist and we have a voice. Isn't this exciting? And here we are at the moment, this big country, small population, relatively insignificant, I would suggest, but here we are busily planning to recognise a country in association with UK, France, Canada, and 140 other countries. Isn't that a buzz? That we're actually at the forefront, I guess, of recognising Palestine. Now, the frustrating feature for me is that we have been watching the decimation of a country, the completely destruction of its buildings and everything else that I've just talked about. We have been watching that for over a year now, nearly 2 years, in fact. And you know, I don't understand why, sure, Hamas were terrible. What they did was shocking. We all need to acknowledge that. Someone says Kushner would have some interesting plans. Oh, God. Good point. Point, Mark. So, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, I think that we could have and should have responded to the genocide a long, long time ago. The question really remains is, why didn't we? What has got in the way of us saying after 6-7 months, when we saw, tens of thousands of people being killed, and well, not just tens, we saw women and children, we saw hospitals being bombed, we saw schools being destroyed, we saw, little clusters of the population that were living in tents, we saw them blowing up. We saw attacks on journalists. We saw all this stuff. And this is what makes me mad about the Australian government. And at that point, it was the Labor Party, which is still frustrating. As I've said many times before, I've been very frustrated with Penny Wong. And on this particular issue, I'm very frustrated with the Labor government. I don't disagree with what they've done now, but I've been disappointed that, Albanese, who for many years has been involved in this movement to free Palestine and have a two-state solution. It's his thing. But for whatever reason, they couldn't call out Israel for what they've done because, I think, and tell me what you think, but because of this fear that they've had that they would be seen as anti-Semitic. That somehow, and also the power of aspects of the Jewish lobby, and they have been fearful of them. Now, I think that the Jewish lobby in particular, one aspect of it. Now, I just need to qualify this. I'm about to show you something from the Jewish Independent in a moment, which I subscribe to because they provide an independent view, an independent Jewish view of what's happening in Gaza and around the world. They're worth subscribing to. I would suggest if any of you have an opportunity, it's free, I think, so please subscribe to them. So I think that we could have, we waited to respond to this after other countries had chosen to do so. We could have set the path forward in relation to Gaza, and we could have made statements about how important it was for us to at least recognise that the proportion of people that have been killed since October the 7th, 23, has been way out of proportion, and that there was something happening in terms of just this moral stand we could have taken about the number of people and the people that were killed, women and children, the pointless killing of innocent people. But we chose not to because we're friggin' cowards, basically, that we didn't have the guts to be able to stand up for what we could, for what most of us, unless you're working with Sky News, of course, they have a completely different perspective around all of this. But we could have stood up, and we should have, but we didn't. And I would even argue that now is too late. That had we made this stand earlier, regardless of the negotiations supposedly taking place, and regardless of the lack of information that probably most of us had about what those negotiations comprised of, who was negotiating with what and with whom, that, at the end of the day, we could have done things differently, but we didn't. And this is where sometimes in Australia it really pisses me off that we could take the lead. We're not, Australians aren't stupid people. We're a bit laissez-faire, admittedly, and we kind of, like to call it as it is. But we don't call it as it is when we need to. We give in to the United States all the time. We're so adherent to our so-called, but I doubt, our so-called obligations to the great and the almighty and the exceptional United States, which is bullshit. We should not be. In fact, we should decide to stand on our own 2 feet. And as even the government now is saying, we are a sovereign country, big deal. We've always been a sovereign country. That we should now make decisions based on what is in our best interest. But what is in our best interest, Albo? Our best interest is not to hand over, change the topic slightly, apologise for that. But I'm on a rant. Complaining too late is just window dressing. Mark, agree. We have. And we should actually have done things much earlier. And, it's like a group of people who just choose to follow another person or another ideology because it just seems convenient. Not because they necessarily believe in it or whatever, but because they just like to be one of the crowd. They just like to be part of the group, I guess. And we're deciding that we want to be part of this group. We want to be part of these 140 countries that are now calling for a 2-state solution. We just want to be a party to that. And it drives me bloody crazy because we should have more guts, more balls to be able to make decisions about what's in our best interest as a nation. Right? So I don't know whether governments just put out feelers. Well, they did. They called them elections. They put out these feelers to find out, how do people generally think about this stuff? And in the meantime, while all this has been happening, there's been this debate about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And, we put up this special envoy in relation to anti-Semitism who came back with these proposals, which one wonders will ever be addressed anyway because they were given by a right-wing Jewish person. And it just inflames the situation. And then we've got bloody Sky News, on the other hand, as I've already presented over the last couple of presentations. Do watch them. I encourage you to watch them. I encourage you to also, just say this, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel, ring the bells, all that sort of shit. But we have this constructed division between what's happening in Gaza and whether it's right or wrong. It's wrong, end of story. What Hamas did, right or wrong, it was wrong, end of story, no problems. But, and then we have people like Sky News and the right-wing media selling us bullshit about how terrible Hamas are. We know that, end of story. But IDF and Israel and Netanyahu is just as big a terrorist as is Hamas. But they're not seen as terrorists because they have a democracy, right? And, we need to face the fact that Netanyahu wants to stay in power so he doesn't go to jail. John Trump was the same sort of thing. He wanted to stay in power. He wanted power, so he didn't go to jail. So we've got these corrupt individuals running those two countries. And in the meantime, we step back and we have to play to them. We play to the Jewish people because, or the Israel, not Jewish people. We play to the Israel because we want to make sure that we're not anti-Semitic. And then we played to Donald Trump because they have all the power in terms of providing for us whatever we need in terms of security in our region, because we haven't got the guts or balls to do it on our own or to look for other partners. And it's woeful. In fact, it's pathetic. And there has to come a time where Australian governments say enough is enough. And we have to find other partners. So, at the moment, changing topic just slightly, with regard to trade, I predicted, when Trump brought up this tariff shit, I predicted, because I'm extremely wise, I predicted that, I could almost hear the laughter from across the internet then. But I knew that countries that are smart will say, bugger Washington and the United States, and we're just going to go out and do our own thing now, and we'll look for other other people to purchase our product or to trade with. Because United States, even though they think they are the greatest country in the world, they are not the greatest purchaser. It turns out Europe is the greatest purchaser, while Asia and China and Taiwan are the greatest manufacturers. And not the United States, even though the United States wants to be. They want to go back to a place back in the 50s and 60s that they've since outgrown, simply because they were greedy bastards and decided they wanted to make all this stuff overseas because it was cheaper. Their problem, they made the problem, China benefited from it, and now they're kicking themselves in the arse because they believe that it's China is at fault as opposed to themselves and their own sense of capitalism. That's the way it's unfolded. But here in Australia, we've got, the reality is we've got unlimited resources. And we've got a good education system. We've got a place in which people want to come to live. I don't know, if you had to choose between Australia or the United States, would you choose the United States, the most violent place on earth? I don't think so. Notice there were three more. There was another shooting incident in the US in Texas, where 3-4 people died. Terrible place to live, whatever. Where would you prefer to live? Most people, I guess, hopefully, would choose Australia because crime is less, the weather's fabulous, and which that's a diverse countryside. So, okay, so back to the other issue. So just to bring us up to date on what's happening around all of this. So the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced Australia will move to recognise Palestine statehood at the UN. So we know that the federal government said the Israel government was extinguishing the prospect of a two-state solution with access to Gaza, so trying to destroy Gaza. I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge. They're extinguishing the prospect of a two-state solution. Reveals that he spoke with Israel counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu last week. Now, this is the other issue. Susan Lee and the coalition opposition said they have serious concerns about the Australian government decision to unilaterally recognise the Palestinian state outside of a proper peace and two-state process. I have no idea what that means. So, Susan Lee, incidentally, just focusing on Susan Lee, another Sky News issue, which I think blows me away, is that the Sky News are continually, after dark that is, are continuing to have a shot at Susan Lee to the point whereby I feel sorry for her. They are incessant. It's continual. And I think that they had, Bronwyn Bishop on. They dragged these old farts. I shouldn't talk, I'm not all that young myself in case you haven't noticed. But they dragged these old farts onto Sky News and asked them, do you think, there's a segment where they asked Bronwyn, do you think Andrew Hastie should take over from Susan Lee? Now, loaded questions like that to someone like Bronwyn, who doesn't know where she is from one day to the next, is quite compromising because she wants to support the Liberal Party, but you're not supporting the Liberal Party if you start to cite someone else who should be the Liberal Party leader. And so she said, well, I think we should give Susan Lee time to prove herself, right? But they're after, number one, they're after a male, and they're after someone that's further right than Susan Lee. Because, as I've talked about before on some of my other posts, the feedback that the Liberal Party are now getting in terms of the last election was that they moved too far to the right and they were too Trump-light. And so they have to find another position to be. And Susan, to her credit, mark my words, I'm crediting Susan with something, but to her credit, she has chosen to moderate her behaviour to make it more palatable to the community. And I see that as a good thing, not a bad thing. I've often said, I will continue to say, that we actually need to have people in Parliament who are a good opposition. That's really important, that we have people in Parliament who can make the other side really accountable. Now, Susan Lee, previously, she was an attack dog. You watched her in Question Time, boy, man, you got into trouble by even looking at her, I reckon. And she would come out at elbow and be quite aggressive. And it was distasteful. I don't know where she got that feedback back. She probably heard me. She probably understood everything that I was saying about the way she behaved in Parliament previously, and she's changed her behaviour, of course. So she has changed, which is good, because she's no longer so repulsive. But what has happened in the Liberal Party is they can't accept, and Sky News cannot accept, number one, they have a woman leader. Number two, they have an issue, generally, around women and women politicians in particular. And it was really interesting when Susan Lee decided that she wasn't going to lead with a couple of key women, Hume and somebody else in her party, put them in shadow ministries, then, all hell broke loose. But Sky News don't like women, to start with. Heaven only knows why Peter Crellin and Carrie Markson are there. But at the end of the day, the result will be that Susan Lee will lose her position because there'll be so much pressure from the right in order to get rid of her, to replace her with someone like Andrew Hastie. And the thing that makes Andrew so important and so impressive to them, apparently, is because he fought in Afghanistan. Well, and that's that. This is the Americanisation of Australian politics. Why is it that because someone has served in the military, that they are somehow more experienced and more important than somebody else? I'm trying to think of Robert, what's his name, who someone will tell me, who buggered up because he killed people that he shouldn't have killed. Someone put that name up there. I know Dee's there. She could probably put that there for me. The end of the day, they're going to get rid of her. There's no doubt about that. And they're going to replace her with this other guy. And I know, from my experience working for years with the Vietnam veterans in particular, because you've gone to war and you come back, doesn't necessarily mean you're a smart little Vegemite. It actually means you're probably going to come back with some trauma that is going to get in the way of the work that you do. Now, I'm not suggesting that Andrew has any of those issues, but the chances are going to war, going to serve in Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever it might have been, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to come back as a whole person. To the contrary, you like to come back damaged. But anyway, according to the right, they're the ingredients. Now, those ingredients are sort of they replicate what happens in the United States, where if you've served, you're a hero, regardless of how shitty that you've been, and no matter how crappy you are when you get back because you beat your partners up and you're angry and you drink a lot and have other problems, but nevertheless, you should be a hero. So I would want to dispense with that. And one of the things I want to say is that, where is it? I wanted to, so I'm pivoting all over the place, I know. And I apologise. And thanks for all the people that have come online. I really appreciate it. If you've got a comment, please make a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Please make it known so I can pop it up on the screen. So recognition of Palestine is only a beginning. Now this is what I wanted to show to you earlier. This is from the Jewish Independent. So subscribe to it. I think it's a really interesting publication. It takes a very middle-of-the-road attitude. So it does talk about, in this particular article, Albanese's decision to announce Australia will recognise the state of Palestine, and it's a dramatic break from the past. Australia, decades-long approach was to put formal recognition of a Palestinian state at the end point of negotiations last May over former. So let's quote Gareth Evans, who was Foreign Minister many years ago. We were immediately recognised Palestinian statehood, not just as a final outcome, political settlement, but as a way of kick-starting it. And they do go on to quote a number of other people talking about this particular issue. And what I find with their reporting is that it is a Jewish perspective, but it's realistic as well. And it's citing so it hasn't got that right-leaning approach that some of them do have, like Sky News. It has balance. And I just need to finish, I think, by saying, and firstly, if there's any, Ben Robert Smith, thanks, that's what I meant to say, Ben, I don't know why I forget his name, but thanks, Mark, I appreciate that. But the other thing too is that I just want to have this conversation about how this behaviour, in terms of recognising Palestine, defending the Palestinians in Gaza, working towards a solution of peace. I don't understand how that breeds anti-Semitism. I need someone to explain that to me. That we want the Jewish people, or people, not all Jewish, but people living in Israel, whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim or whatever you might be. We want you to live in peace and harmony. And we want you to live with people of different faiths who simply want to get on with their lives. It doesn't seem all that complicated to me. And who are those anti-Semitic people that attack homes? There's an interesting piece, incidentally, on Media Watch. I was going to play it for you, but last time I played something on Media Watch, I got a bit of a strike from YouTube, so I won't be doing that again. But watch Media Watch for this week, because at the end they talk about a Daily Mail article which highlights a lot of Jewish people who are prominent Jewish people. And actually what it did was it raised the profile of people who didn't want their profile raised. They didn't want to be named in a newspaper. And a lot of those Jewish people were really upset by the fact that the Daily Mail had thought that they were doing them a favour by talking about who they were. And this resulted, I think, in anti-Semites going along and spraying their houses and doing other terrible things. And sometimes when they trying to figure out an appropriate way of wording this, but when you try to try to think if it's justifying behaviour, or when you highlight one group, this is the way I'll put it. When you highlight one group over another, so we talk about anti-Semitism, which is wrong. Hate speech is wrong. Nazis, they're wrong. Islamophobia is wrong. All those things are wrong, right? But when you start to focus on one more than another, there's this moral panic that takes shape, I reckon, whereby we start to all think that this is simply, that this is endemic, that there are so many people who are being targeted, who are Jewish. And there may well be, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that they're not, or that there's a small number or a large number, I don't know. But when we see people talk about Islamophobia, we often see those people, whether they be from Afghanistan, or whether they be Palestinian or whatever they might be, we kind of see them in the light, and this is what Sky News does, and it really frustrates me, is they'll produce somebody up and they'll show them giving what I think is revolting speeches sometimes, but they'll make them out to be terrorists. They're not. They're just talking about stuff that matters to them, and some of them were horrible in expressing their delight on October the 8th. So, and no one's supporting that, or not supporting that, obviously. But when you highlight just that one element all the time, so you've got that happening on the one, and this is what Sky News do. They highlight that all the time, and then they highlight the attacks on Jewish people a lot of the time as well. And you don't ever see this sort of internal story. You don't see the personal stories that's happened for the Jewish peoples. You probably see more of that, but you certainly don't see it for people that are suffering Islamophobia. You just don't. And so the other day, I watched Tommy Robinson. Now, if you don't know, Tommy Robinson is a racist dude in the UK rather, who's got heaps and heaps of coverage because he's speaking about, white nationalism and replacement theory and all that sort of crap. Anyway, what I did was, my son came in while I was watching it and said, "Dad, why are you watching that crap?" And it was a good question, really. And it was an interview on trigonometry, worth watching. And what I wanted to know, and I think this is really important, I might finish on this note, what I found really important was to try and understand who this dude was. And this is what interests me, like, if you want to have a conversation with me about any issue that matters to you, give me a call, or send me. I will put down my, just bear with me. I just put in my email address, right? So I've just put in my email address. So if anybody wants to contact me and have a conversation in one of my live feeds or another time that fits with you, let me know. Because I'm not interested, I'm actually interested in what people think about and the reasons why they believe what they believe. And when I was watching Tommy Robinson, I was fascinated by the fact that he led a terrible life growing up, basically. In terms of, he didn't mention his father at all, he only mentioned his mother, interestingly enough. But, he grew up in an area in the UK that was very violent, and where there were lots of ethnic groups, and those ethnic groups were pitted against everybody else, apparently, according to him. And what he would do, though, was he would cite one incident that had happened to him, and for whatever reason, that one incident would colour the way he viewed everything in relation to that. And I'll have Elizabeth. I'll have a look at I'll respond to that in a moment. Thanks, Elizabeth. And it fascinated me that there he was building a business, as it turned out, making X amount of dollars, but everything that he had learned and he had then constructed came from singular incidences in his life. And rather than, which is what I'd prefer to do, is to have a look at... So what he did was he read the Quran, which is fine, good on him. I haven't. I've read the Bible, but I haven't read the Quran. But from that, he picked the things that validated his view of Islam. Now, I could do the same with the Bible and say that any Christian, based on what I've read in the Bible, is hateful, murderous, indulges in infidelity, infanticide, racial prejudices. You could just cite everything, right? And that's basically what he's done when he read the Quran. And at the end of the day, I kind of felt sorry for him. He's a pathetic individual who just hasn't got a grip on what the wider world is thinking or doing, or where the wider world is moving, because he's so encased in his own crap. And I just want to bring this one up from Elizabeth. Oops, wrong one. Where Elizabeth says, most Aboriginal people experience racism every day. I've talked about that. And I am the first to admit that I would not even know what that would feel like. I can sympathise. I don't know whether you're going to empathise if you haven't experienced it or doesn't know what it's like. You know, I know what it's like to be bullied. I know what it's like to be put down. I know what it's like to be negated. I understand all of that because I've been there with all of those things. But to have certain things said or done to you simply because of the colour of your skin without anyone knowing you is repulsive. But I've never lived it. But I can imagine, as you're saying, Elizabeth, it happens. And I know, because I've worked with Indigenous people and I know this stuff happens to them every day. I can remember one Indigenous person saying to me, when I wake up in the morning, I just wonder what's going to happen to me today. I'll just be walking down the street and someone will decide to walk on the other side of the road, or they'll decide to, have a go at me or say some slur towards me. So, yeah, I know. It does happen every day. Now, I've had a number of viewers on today and I really do appreciate that. I could just finish with, please subscribe, ring the bell for further notifications. I really do appreciate that. After all, you are looking at my retirement program. And in the meantime, if you've got something that you want to discuss, I've sent the email. You can email me if you want to discuss something specifically. And if you want to come online, I have the provision to be able to do that. And we could have a 15, 20-minute discussion about things that matter to you as well, if you so desire. And if you've got a camera and audio and a computer, obviously. In the meantime, all I can say to you all is take care, look after yourselves. And more importantly, make sure that you and the people that you love are safe. Bye.